Thank y'all for being here this morning. It's obviously been a really, really tough week. You know, people have lots of different emotions, have been reeling. And something I've noticed throughout my life is often when tragedy or tough times or tough weeks come by, we miss key points. We get so tied up and so caught up in a part of a thing that's in front of us that we don't see the greater thing. So this morning is me taking a very sensitive subject and being a bit bold and going to look at it and try to point out a couple of things to help all of us process. This is obviously where I'm at functioning through this, and it may not be where everybody else is at. That's whether you're listening to this online or afterwards, but it's not the design to say Rick's right. It's just a design to say that some things to consider. So without further ado, um, I will share. So y'all can see that hopefully. So a couple things. This is a famous picture. It's a little blurry, and so people, before anybody says, Rick, you should have got one with better pixelation, I didn't want one with better pixelation. Because this, even though it's a picture that was done hundreds of years ago, is very graphic. It shows that the thing that you see in the middle is an angel standing with Christians before the slaughter, before Nero in the Colosseum. And there's a lion, there's people, there's crosses prepared, there's a fiery place prepared. It's all the different ways that Nero liked to take Christians out. And part of my point is this, that martyrs have happened since AD 33. I mean, since that date, believers have been martyred for all sorts of various reasons. And we're going to look at a little bit about that. But there are two questions that I want people to not just answer like really quickly, like you do when you're in a classroom, but to really, really noodle on, ponder, let them sink in. Are we being persecuted as Christians today? And if so, are we prepared spiritually? And that's where I'm going to kind of hang out today. So this is a person that I never knew before he passed away, and I was working on a church security uh, convention that we were bringing together when Father Jacques Hamel was brutally murdered while presenting Mass in Paris, France in July of 2016. And if I could have somebody read Micah 7:8.
Do not rejoice over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will stand up. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light.
So this verse is been a verse that I've thought a lot about this week. Um, don't rejoice. If you're an enemy, don't rejoice because I'm going to be stronger. The thing about Father Jacques Hamel was, for our Catholic brethren, it is a long process to become a saint. This happened so quickly and as a martyr that the Pope was like, no, fast track to sainthood. Like, we're pulling out all the stops, the 5 year delay, all these things. Nope, not doing it. And this guy, all he did in France was help people come to Christ. He worked with the poor, he worked with the illiterate, and he was trying to work with some of the immigrants, of which two Muslim kids came in that had been radicalized, and they're the ones that during the Eucharist, which is communion, killed him in front of everybody. And nobody, when they're getting ready to do communion, is thinking something like that is going to happen. And so it was really tragic. the people of France really reeled from us. I think some of us went, "Wow, that's really," ugh. But it didn't hit us as hard as some of the events of this past week did. So let's look at who were Christian martyrs, and we're gonna delve into this. We're gonna hang here for a little bit because I think it's important that we have a little bit of an understanding. So I need someone to go to Acts 7:51 through 53, and then somebody else be prepared to read 54 to 56.
51 through 53, you said?
Mm-hmm.
I've got the second
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Man, my eyes are not working this morning. I apologize. You stiff-necked people with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you are just like your fathers. You always resist the Holy Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your fathers did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and martyred him. You who have received the law, you that was put into effect through the angels, but have not obeyed it. I'm trying to think, where am I ending? I think that was it. That was me. Okay, sorry.
All right. So this is Stephen. A few things that we need to know about Stephen. Everybody pretty much knows Stephen was the first martyr after Christ was killed. But I think this is really, really one of those goose chill moments when you realize Stephen was about 31 years old, the same age as Charlie Kirk was. Stephen was preaching the gospel. He was calling out the Pharisees. He wasn't mincing words. He was saying, what you're doing is wrong. That's not what God wants. This is what God wants. And then Mary Beth, if you could read 54 through 60.
The Jewish leaders were infuriated by Stephen's accusation, and they shook their fists at him in rage. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, gazed steadily into heaven and saw the glory of God, and he saw Jesus standing in the place of honor at God's right hand. And he told them, "Look, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing in the place of honor at God's right hand." Then they put their hands over their ears and began shouting. They rushed at him and dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. His accusers took off their coats and laid them at the feet of a young man named Saul. And as they stoned him, Stephen prayed, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." He fell to his knees, shouting, "Lord, don't charge them with this sin." And with that, he died.
So I'm going to pivot here for a second. Stephen's death was brutal. The stones they were throwing were not like little tiny pea gravel. We're talking most of these stones were somewhere in the pound range. So just imagine pound rocks, they're uneven, smashing into your body. It is a gruesome, horrific, very public, broad daylight way to leave the earth. Stephen, even as this is being done, does not yield his voice. He preaches. He's letting everybody know. And something that's often missed is there's a man named Saul that's there as they're throwing the coats, watching it. We talk about Saul's conversion on the road to Damascus. But I was reminded when studying this that there's another famous thing. There are pivot points, or to use the phrase everybody has done this week, and rightfully so, there are turning points in history. And one of those in our own history was John Quincy Adams stood up, and there's a place, if you go to the Capitol, you need to go. They will show it to you on the tour, where John Quincy Adams in the old Capitol Rotunda stood up and he gave this impassioned speech about slavery. There was a young congressman from Illinois who didn't really have an opinion on the issue, had never given us a real speech on the issue. And John Quincy Adams died in that young person's arms. He was one of the two people that held him when he died. That man was Abraham Lincoln. The impact of Quincy's speech in death changed Lincoln. Lincoln said that twice in his writings, that because of that passion, he had to go look at the issue more closely. Many have argued, had that turning point not happened in Lincoln's life, we might not have had the president of 1860 that held this country together through some of its darkest days, called the Civil War. Many theologians argue that yes, while Paul was on the road to Damascus, that the foundation in his understanding of martyrdom and everything may have been a turning point here when Stephen's martyred. Because without Paul, the majority of the New Testament never gets written. Now, yes, God would have found somebody else. I'm not going down that argument. But I'm just saying, when you think of Saul being there, the coats, everything that's going on in the martyrdom of Stephen, that had an impact. And that impact with Paul's life was great upon this planet and upon the people. Paul, of course, himself is martyred in somewhere around 64, 67. The only thing we know was he was martyred just after Peter, but we don't know how long just after. Then you have Ignatius of Antioch. You may not know him. He's an early church father. It's the individual that the Jesuits try to pound themselves off of St. Ignatius. Thomas Becket in 1170. There was a bunch of people in between, but I figured most people might not know them. Then we get to America, and a lot of times we have this attitude here in the United States of like, that was over there, not here. No, yeah, we had what was called in North America the Martyrs. They were three Jesuit priests that went to preach the gospel in New Orleans, and they were slaughtered in front of the crowds for it. We had in Boston. And you're like, wait, what, Boston, Rick? Come on, Massachusetts was a religious, yep. But these were three Quakers that went to say that there was a different denomination, and yeah, nope, they were killed for it. You have Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's very famous, and there's a great movie that Angel Pictures put out on his life, on how he stood up to the Lutheran Church. It's not just to Hitler, to the Lutheran Church, and said, "What are you doing? You should be willing to be martyred for God to say this is wrong, everything that's going on," and they didn't. Jim Elliot, who many of you may or may not know, but he was an American missionary that went down to Latin America, was killed introducing the gospel of Christ to natives, and as a result of his death, that entire population became Christians, and there was an explosion of Christianity in the area. Martin Luther King, who for many, many people, I think Charlie Kirk will be the Martin Luther King of this time. A lot of people are looking at it that way. John Allen Chow was another American young man who went to the South Pacific to introduce, much like Jim Elliot, the gospel, and the same thing pretty much happened to him. So there's literally tens of thousands of Christian martyrs. I mean, I just highlight a few. This is by no means is an exhaustive list or even a fair list. It's a small list. But here's why I bring it home. This is here in the United States. This is something that I've dealt with and I've never really brought up in this group, but I figured this is a good time. Every single one of these places that I put up here are where people died. And I'm going to highlight on the right-hand column as you're looking at 4 and 5, 2017 First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, most people knew about, and then St. Alphonsus Church in Fresno. So the morning of Sutherland Springs, I had a scheduled call that morning before I went to church with Margaret Mims, the sheriff of Fresno. And when she picked up the phone, I said, "Margaret, I'm so sorry we're having this call today because like this is just horrible." She said, "Yeah, it is." And she was sobbing. And I was like, "Those poor people at the church." And she says, "I know, Rick." She goes, I wish there was more I could do." And I said, "I think there's more all of us could do." And she goes, "I sent deputies." And I went, "What? You sent deputies to Sutherland Springs?" And she said, "No, I sent them to St. Alfonso's church." "What?" And there were two different locations in this country the same morning within an hour of each other where people were martyred at their church. Yet, is this something that we openly talk about as Christians? Is this something that we have stood up as a church, whether it's a denomination, whether it's an ecumenical movement that says, holy cow? Because I want you to think for a moment. If we put this up and these were Buddhist monasteries, would the Asian community be quiet? If these were mosques in America, would there not be public outcry even within the halls of Congress? But I would argue we've been silent. And this isn't to rile people up. That's not what this study is about. It's to say, like, no matter where you're watching this, there's a state near you that this has happened in. You know, for those of us here in California, it's happened in Northern California, in Fresno. It's happened in the capital of Sacramento. It happened again in the same year down here in Laguna Woods. In fact, Pete and I and some other people know the good doctor that lost his life trying to defend other people. Pulled his pistol to defend other people, but still happened. And none of this makes sense to a lot of people, but it will. So I put this book up. This is a book that I bought in 1990. And when I bought it, I'm going to be upfront. There was a place called Berean Christian Bookstore. I went to it. They had it near the front counter. I saw it and I just started laughing. Frog in the kettle. And I'll read it. It says, place a frog in a pot of boiling water and it will quickly jump out, aware that the environment is dangerous. Place a frog in a kettle full of room temperature water and slowly increase the temperature of the water until it's boiling, and the frog will stay in the water until it boils to death. And this is 1990, and he said, will the Christian community be like the frog? And he put out all these things that were going to happen to us by the year 2000. And he talked to all this nonsense. And I'll just highlight a couple of the nonsensical things he said in 1990. He said the church is going to get so weak, that people will die in churches and we will say nothing. The church is going to get so weak that governments will tell the church when it can say something, when it can do something, when it can be opened, and the church will do nothing. The church is going to get so weak that people will place other things before it while still claiming the power of Jesus Christ. And I laughed. I remember looking at Mary Beth. I was working in youth ministry at the time and I'm like, wake up, George, and smell the coffee. And George was working at Talbot Theological Seminary just down the road, from where I was working as a youth pastor at the time. And I was like, George, you were so misguided. I would giggle seeing in our modest little trailer that they had for the youth pastor at the church and his family. I would giggle at some of the things he put in and went, this is ludicrous. And yet, it was spot on. Because we've all witnessed where we've been as a church. Sorry. This is a scene out of Kentucky. This young man at Christmas went to place a cross in his front yard to remind people that Christmas wasn't about Santa Claus and that the true gift of Christmas wasn't just a baby Jesus, but what the baby Jesus would do on that cross. He had people. Now I want you to think about this. Kentucky, Bible Belt. And these people came out and spat on him, yelled at him. It became a media circus. But Matthew 5:11 said, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. And my point is, Jesus told us, this is part of that. You accept me. People are going to insult you. How many of us, when we've been insulted, have been like, what's that about? Instead of looking at it going, yeah, that's right. I'm a Christian. I'm walking the good path, and you're insulting me. My Lord told me you were going to do this. I'm not shocked. How many of us, when we've been persecuted, have said the same thing? Or when someone has said something false, and I know for some of us, we're going through that. I've been through it multiple times. I know all of you, as my friends, have shared with me about times you've went through or going through, and we will all go through again because of us. And some of you are going to say things like, well, Rick, I don't know, and so I'm just going to say to you, it's very easy to fall into the devil's trap and say, well, this isn't because I'm a Christian. This is because I'm Rick. But is it? Because Christ dwells inside of me. I have the Holy Spirit with me. And many of the things that people have spoke falsely and said evil was because I made Christian-based decisions. I didn't go with the world. I didn't hang with the world. I went against the world. I called things out lovingly as a Christian, said, that's not right. And then had made up things and evil things and other things. And many of you, when you've shared with me some of the things you're going through, I looked at you and thought, this isn't because of you alone. It's because you are standing up for the beliefs that our Lord told us to stand up for. And it's hard. It doesn't make it any easier. But we got to remember this verse in Matthew 5, verse 11. So I don't know if you guys ever have like preachers that you followed. I incredibly admired Billy Graham. And Franklin Graham, I thought like, wow, he was a pistol according to both of his parents. And then he started a thing called Samaritan's Purse, and I have really believed in what Samaritan's Purse has done for quite some time. And so here's a quote from Franklin Graham that I think is very apropos to where we're at. And this is a program. He said, I believe we're going to see persecution in this country. We've already seen many laws that have been passed that restrict our freedom as Christians. I believe it's going to get worse. We do have a problem in this country, and we are losing our religious freedom, and we're losing it a little bit day by day. That last part bothers me. And it bothers me for a reason. I fight in a capital in one of the most egregious states when it comes for a complete and utter disregard for decorum and rule of law across the board, not just the narrow space that I'm in there to defend the people of California in this country's rights, but across the board. But when I go back to Franklin's statement here, we do have a problem in this country, and we're losing our religious freedom, and we're losing it a little bit day by day. I would make the argument that part of the reason that's happening is because we're silent. We don't call people out for it. It's like there's this fear. I've talked to a couple of people this week, and they're like, oh, well, being a Christian is too political. So is being a Second Amendment advocate. So is being a free speech advocate. So is being a person that says, no, you can't put the military in my house and watch everything my wife and I does. I can go down the list. I'm not going to go down our constitutional rights this morning. That's not what this Bible stuff talks about. But folks, first and foremost, before all of those things, I'm called to do a couple things. One of them is I'm definitely called to spread the gospel, the truth. And second, to defend it. And I have to look at statements like this and go, do I, Rick, do that to the best of my ability on a daily basis? Or are there times that I just bite my lip and let the devil have free rein and walk by? So this is somebody that I followed through the whole Samaritan's Purse thing. So you may or may not have heard, but Aaron and Melissa Klein, very normal looking people. They don't have horns growing out of their head. They're not weird. They owned a bakery. And I'm going to stop there. I mean, Joel, you understand this really well. You definitely should understand this, Cheryl. I understand that anybody that's ever started a business knows that that's your livelihood. You don't have a boss, an organization, a corporation to go to and go, hey, you got to pay me. Like, you don't get paid unless your business is making money. That's just a fact. So they have this business called Sweet Cakes, and they made things, and they would make very cool Christian wedding cakes and stuff. And then comes Rachel Cryer and Laura Bowman, and they even admitted post all of this, they admitted they targeted these people. And they went in and said, okay, so you make religious cakes, make us one. We're lesbians. And she said, we'll make you a cake, but we won't make you a religious cake. And they're like, no, you will make us a religious cake. And she said, no, we'll make you a cake. We'll make you a nice cake, but we're not doing that. That's against our beliefs. Constitutional right, by the way. State of Oregon shut their store down and forbid anybody to allow the store to be opened anywhere in the state of Oregon. Now, I know Joel and I spent some time recently talking about his business and stuff. Like, that would be devastating for Joel. If all of a sudden the state of California said, you have to shut down all your businesses and you can never open them up again in the state of California. And we're blocking you no matter what you do. That is beyond financially crushing. That's soul crushing. It's part of Joel's identity. That is like some of the most heinous stuff. But to add insult to injury, they also find this people. So they've just lost all their income. They've just lost their business. They've lost all their clients, their identity. Hey, and could you pay them $135,000 for their emotional damage? Like, people, this is brutal. And this is what Franklin Graham said. They have taken a stand for the word of God, and they should not have to stand alone. Please pray for our nation when our judges are punishing Christians for practicing what they believe. That's persecution, plain and simple. My question, did the church in America rise up and say never again? Or did we just say, that's an interesting news story, and move on? Legacy and impact. This is a young Charlie Kirk when he first started out. Martyrs have inspired the growth of Christianity, and their influence on modern faith and practice is being felt here in Huntington Beach over the past 2 days. 5 high schools that have never allowed anybody to come in and preach the gospel did. Huntington Beach High yesterday, 200 kids walked up because a 19-year-old who has stood up in the wake of this and said, Charlie preached, I'm going to preach. He preached. 200 students received Christ last night. That's happened at 5 high schools, including my Mary Beth and my alma mater that's just down the street. Nobody came into our high school when we were in there. And that was during the whole, if you ever remember it, the I Found It campaigns, when they had the I Found It buttons on like all the big billboards, and you were supposed to found what? Oh, Jesus Christ. And I mean, we went there during that big movement. That wasn't there. 1 Peter 3:15 says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. I cannot find a person, I'm not just saying because of what happened to Mr. Kirk, I cannot find a person in this country who did that any better than him. That walked 1 Peter 3:15. And I am motivated and challenged to tighten up my stuff that I do when I speak throughout the state and online and different places, to do the same. This does come from me. So I'm going to share something I shared with Mary Beth. I did not fight in the global war on terror. I missed by like literally 7 days fighting in the Gulf War, first Gulf War. I fought in what was called the Cold War. And it was hard for many of us because things happened. Militaries did what militaries are trained to do. And but it was not an officially called war. We weren't getting like ribbons and stuff like that to do anything. And we were at a location, and it had been a very rough week. And we had a couple of officers with us, which wasn't normal. And one of my buddies made the comment. He said, well, this just sucks because it's not even a war. And the the lieutenant colonel kind of looked at us when I made the statement, and I, along with a couple of our guys, said, "Yeah, no kidding," or something to that effect. When this major that we did, he wasn't our major, but we knew him, and he was an Air Force major. And officers don't do this often, but he had volunteered for 3 additional tours to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So when someone serves 4 years in a war zone within the military, there's a level of respect because it meant they chose to go back. And he walked up to us and he said, "How many of you are Christians?" And within my particular 12-man group, only 2 weren't. And he said, "Okay, you 2 are excused." And then he looked at the other 10 of us and he said, "What is wrong with you? You're always at war. Always. That war ends when you meet Jesus Christ because your life here has been done, or when he returns. But until then, you're in a constant state of war. How could you be so clueless?" And walked away. There were no more smart remarks. So if I can have somebody read Ephesians 6:12-20. And while you're getting that, I want to remind everybody, when you enlist, you understand you may be called into battle, but not that you will. Yet you train for battle regardless. The same goes for the Christian. We're in a state of warfare.
No, I was going to say I've got it, but my eyes just aren't working very well this morning, Rick. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I got it. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities, against cosmic powers and this darkness, against evil, or I'm sorry, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil, spiritual forces in the heavens. For this reason, take up the full armor of God so that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having prepared everything to take your stand. Stand, therefore, with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like the armor on your chest, and your feet sandaled with the readiness for the gospel of peace. In every situation, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray at all times in the Spirit with every prayer and request, and stay alert with all perseverance and intercession for all of the saints. Pray also for me, that the message may be given to me when I open my mouth to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel. For this I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may be bold enough to speak about it as I should.
So the picture I used for this slide, I did on purpose. It wasn't casually thought out. So this picture is Air Force Tier 1 operators, and they have the most advanced tactical setup. It is like incredible gear. And it's freaking useless if you don't realize who your enemy is and what you're fighting. Many Christians take Ephesians 6:12-20 because it's tactical, COOL. They have it tattooed on them. They carry them bookmarks. They put stickers, everything, because it's got this really cool battle theme to it. But they forget the first part. And that is when it says, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you'll be able to stand against him and stand firm against all the strategies of the devil. For we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies. In the wake of what happened, I've heard so many brothers and sisters say, let's go after ... Those are all flesh and blood. What God says is, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Then God tells us, know your enemy. Know who the enemy is. When everybody has talked about the evil, yeah, the evil that we all fight on a daily basis. the evil that breaks up families, that takes people's lives, that does all sorts of things. Here's the other problem in the church. There are some that will take Matthew 10:39 and say, "He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loses his life for my sake shall find it." And they've touted this verse in the past week. But go before that, when in 10:23, he goes, "When you are persecuted in one place," this is Jesus, "flee to another." Jesus doesn't call us of like, "Hey, first and foremost, go get killed for me." He literally says, if this is happening in Huntington Beach, run to Newport. Get out. He doesn't say, double down. He goes, truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. There were hundreds of towns. He was using hyperbole to say, look, this is going to happen a lot. But don't. And it says in Acts 8:1, and Saul approved of their killing him. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. If you go to Acts 17, verses 10 and 14, it talks about Paul running from one place, then running to another place. Paul even knew that's not what we're called to do. But what we are called to do is this: be prepared. It's that old Boy Scout adage. We're called to be prepared. And a lot of people are like, well, how do we prepare for something like this? Because daily we get up and realize every day there's a guarantee. One, God blessed you with another day. And two, just like that major told us, we're always at war. Think about living your life understanding that we're supposed to pray in the Spirit and put on the armor and its power that makes it work. Looking at that, yep, the devil's got powers and principalities. Think of all the conversations that you've just had with me. And if you're watching this, that you've had with other people that start out with, I can't believe this, and then insert whatever that is, did insert whatever that is. But if you were really to look at it and say, wow, the powers and principalities, Satan and his minions, at it again. And then looked at it like this. In warfare, you don't place soldiers on the battlefield unless you think you can gain an advantage. I'm going to say that again. You don't place soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, Guardians, I think that's what they call the Space Force people. You don't put any of those people, Coast Guards people, first responders, where there's not an advantage. You place them exactly where you think you can move the map in your favor. Imagine thinking like, oh, if I was to sit down with Joel and go, wow, we're getting attacked here. What is it Satan's going for, brother? Notice the difference in the tone of my voice, not depression, not what is he going for? Hey, Joel, let's bust out the helmet of salvation. Let's bust out that breastplate and that shield, and let's go see what we can do to muck up his plans. Instead of not sharing. Not sharing what we're going through is exactly what Satan wants. He wants us to be silent little lambs. But we're not called to be silent little lambs. And so times like this are hard, and we're going to be reeling from it for a long time to come. And nobody alive today that watched what happened this week is going to forget it. It's one of those images and one of these moments that you don't remove. And those of us on this thing can probably all tell you exactly where we were when 9/11 happened, exactly where we were when Challenger blew up, and several other key events that have impacted us. We can also tell you exactly where we were when some of the more personal events happened to us in our own lives, from our own families. But how we act as Christians and how we remind ourselves that we're always at war and we always need to be prepared and we always need to be closing the ranks and supporting one another, that's what makes those lives have value. And that's what helps us heal and be stronger and win. For me personally, I had a very interesting conversation. Uh, you know, your Christian faith is something that often in the workplace, there are restrictions. And I went to my workplace this week and said, if there are going to be any restrictions, any, I will tender my resignation. And they said, no, no restrictions. We get it. And I said, that means the gospel message will come out at speeches. When people ask things, I'm not going to shirk away from who I am and what I believe. Approved. That was not the case a decade ago when those same group of people said, be very careful, please don't bring this stuff in, just focus on the things that we pay you to focus on. That's a dynamic change. And part of it was because I don't let brothers and sisters die on the battle lines and not pick up the flag and move it forward. And God calls us to do that by focusing not on the tools he uses, but on the things behind those tools. And those are the powers and principalities. And showing love and kindness is going to steal some of their tools from them and make them brothers and sisters in Christ. And I'm watching it happen in high schools, colleges, and even, dare I say, some of the places where we're speaking. And so I'm going to close with, I love everybody here. I need prayer because I am speaking to 1,500 people on the 27th. And that speech is a 90-minute speech, and there will be a gospel message in it. Questions, comments?
Actually, and being a martyr isn't just death. The persecution that you speak of, in other people's minds, they've already killed you in their minds. So there's a way of being a martyr with actually not being the one that was dispatched, so to speak. They ignore you. They do other things, and in a way, that's a form of being martyred also. If other people are aware of what you're doing and what they did, I would assume.
There's a trap that has been set, and I see people falling into it in social media, and that is the trap of hatred. I admitted in a post I put up yesterday before I went to my granddaughter's birthday celebration at the zoo that I really didn't know very much about Charlie Kirk before he was killed. I knew who he was, and I knew what Turning Point USA was. And I way back when, I think, when they first had a Turning Point thing in San Diego, I had somebody from Turning Point on GunGuyTV to talk about it. If I remember, I'd have to go look through the footage and see if I could find it somewhere in the archives, but it's there, I think. But in any case, I was aware of him, sort of surfaced in a surfacey sort of way. And since his death, I've watched some of the things that he's done, and I had seen some of the things he did before. And then if you go on social media, I don't care, pick one, people say all kinds of horrible things about him that obviously are demonstratively untrue. And now there seems to be a push to destroy those people. Let's destroy their business. Let's get them fired. Let's, they're a teacher at this school or this university. Let's get them, canned or whatever. I understand in the military it makes sense because military under the UCMJ, certain things are forbidden, and military members know that. And when they sign on the dotted line, they know they're not supposed to do certain things.
And they don't have constitutional rights anymore.
They don't. And if they get punished because they opened their mouth in a stupid way, well, that's part of that. That's the deal that they signed. But outside of that, I, I posted. I wonder. I mean, I really do. I suspect that Charlie Kirk, knowing what I know about him now, which is obviously limited, but just watching, I think the evidence of who the man was is if you watch his debates, where he was always interested in a give and take, interested in a discussion, where he would quiet a crowd, and when they started to get obnoxious toward the person he was debating, and say, no, we're not doing that today. We're being respectful. Everybody has a right to their opinion. We're having a discussion. And he would square the crowd away. And I thought, wow, what a marvelous approach that he had. I suspect that he would not approve of this desire to destroy people because they are saying things that people don't like. And even people who have been proponents of the First Amendment, like Elon Musk, has made some comments, and I thought, dude, when you bought Twitter, you said that you only have free speech if people you don't like can say things you don't like.
Right.
And yet you're upset because people are saying things. So I think we can get caught up in the physical battle with people who are lost rather than the spiritual battle that we're fighting, when it would seem to me that young Charlie Kirk would have wanted to sit down and talk with them and try to win them over. But instead of trying to win them over, we're trying to destroy them. And so I really appreciate this message, because I don't think it's our place to fight in such a way that we destroy people who have a differing opinion. I think it's our place to win them over for Christ, which is what Stephen was trying to do, which is what Paul spent the rest of his life trying to do, which is why these men were, all of them died, all of the apostles except John were trying, obviously John was trying to do, and why he was imprisoned on Patmos. And if we forget that, then we fall into the trap of, let's do to them what they're doing to us. And I think that's the devil's errand right there. At least that's my opinion. I don't know what you guys think.
I agree. For me, I value some of the training I got in the military because I really was taught to look at who the enemy is and figure that out. That a lot of times the people in front of you that might even be carrying arms, you had to obviously be prepared. But that often wasn't the enemy. Those were tools of the enemy. And like, how do you dismantle the enemy? And, I've seen some of the vile stuff on social media that was said that, was shocking. And especially in the first 48 hours, angered me beyond no belief. I want to go kit up, gear up, I'm a guy, first one to admit it. And then I had to say, slow your roll, Rick. Mary Beth will tell you I took many long walks this week because I needed to slow my roll and think, okay, a normal person would not have glorified or said that. That is something that doesn't come from a normal human. That comes from the devil. The devil, a demon, they would do that. And so shouldn't I be like, wow, that person's being held prisoner by the enemy? And how do I shine a light in there to tell them there's another path? How do I, and I had a conversation with a Christian sister who said, well, I just feel like in all this, I can't let anybody know I'm a Christian because it's too political. And I said, that's exactly what the devil wants. You are acquiescing to Satan, and you can't do that. And we had a long conversation. I don't know where she went after that conversation, but that was a point I wanted to make this morning was it doesn't matter where she went. I did what I was called to do. Maybe she's going to meet somebody like Cheryl, and Cheryl's going to give a like thing, and then somebody else is going to give a like thing, and that's what nudges along. That's why I put the thing about Paul. Paul did not stop with the cloaks of the assailants against Stephen and go, oh, I was wrong. But God put that into his word to let us know that Saul was impacted by Stephen's murder. And then on the road to Damascus, when Christ has that conversation, it makes a whole lot more sense because Saul would have been thinking in the back of his head of like, oh yeah, there was that Stephen thing, and there were those things that I did. I know exactly what you're talking about. Otherwise, it's just like this random conversation that you just decide to have with this guy on a road. But when you realize all the things Saul witnessed prior to the Damascus experience, it's like, wow, like he was being nudged because people kept pushing, including while they're being killed, the gospel message. And I think I made this comment to somebody else on radio. I said, being a former paramedic, unfortunately, you see a lot of people die. And a lot of the work that I've done, I've had to witness that. I know, Joel, you had that as a first responder. I mean, it's something that you see. Mary Beth had it in the hospital, and we've all had it in our personal lives. And very few people um, have the opportunity to be preaching the gospel of Christ and blink, hey, Jesus. And I sent you and Pete that lovely artwork that was done of Christ holding Charlie Kirk this morning. And I
Yeah.
thought, Charlie went from a stand in Utah to that in the blink of an eye. How many people did I look at scenes that probably their last words were not what you would want to say in a church, that were arguing with their spouse when they were in a fatal accident, were ticked off, were doing something inappropriate. And then, oh, Jesus, like not kind of the way you want to enter the kingdom. Um, what a beautiful way to be granted that, to enter that way.
I want
And
to back up real quick and just look at Stephen. One thing that I think I've missed in the past until just now is that if you look at it from Stephen's point of view, Stephen was just doing what he was doing for God. Stephen didn't know that Saul was there.
oh,
Stephen, he may have, but I mean, he didn't know that Saul was going to be powerfully affected by this. He had no idea that God had put that young man there for that purpose. All he saw was the guy gathering up everybody's holding their coats so they could stone Stephen to death. So we have an effect that we don't understand. We don't understand the depth and breadth of it if we just are faithful and we open our mouths and we, in whatever form that takes, whether it's public or it's on social media or whatever, to defend the gospel and pronounce the gospel and so on and the good news of Christ. I never really thought about Stephen's powerful effect upon Saul, who became the Apostle Paul. And as you said, we know that without him, a good-sized chunk of the New Testament would never have been written by him. God would have had to have somebody else do it. But his writings are incredibly powerful.
and I think it's hard, like when we have any loss, but I think what we're seeing now is a revival amongst many age groups, and not just in this country. I mean, there was a thing in Korea last night where a bunch of people came together and received Christ because of this. Out of that number of Christian brothers and sisters, we added to our side of this war, not subtracted. And so while we lost a very critical brother, I was a little different. Joel, I've been following Charlie for about 5 years now, because where I work, we work with TPUSA in the high schools and some of the college campuses. Never got to meet him personally, so I don't have any of those relationships. I'm not going to do what I've seen a lot of people do and try to make something out of nothing. That's stupid. But one of the things that everybody's got to see is I never once watched him not do a gospel message in a speech. He always brought his faith in God to the forefront. And prior to his death, I'd often felt guilty thinking like, wow, he's not a pastor, didn't go to college, doesn't have a lot of the things that were like, oh, that's what people that go to seminary do, or that's what people that go through all this training do. He never had it. And yet he stood with some of the greatest theologians of our time, the Franklin Grahams, the Greg Laurie's, the Pastor Jeffries. I mean, the people that have and haven't done the same thing. And I thought, as a man, This is a guy who lives it. This is a guy who said on Sabbath day, one day a week, him and his wife would talk of like, we put the phones down. We literally turn them off. We give that day to God. And I'm thinking like, being honest, I've never done that. I'm like, there's always a bit of the echo chamber near me, phone or something. I'm getting something from my good brother Pete. Hey, what do you think about this? Hey, what do you think about like we don't turn them off on Sundays. And then we complain that we haven't recharged. And Charlie would talk about, hey, you gotta let God recharge you. You gotta let God take your soul. You gotta like when you're done with church, it goes off and you're just with family and God. And he goes, what a novel concept, doing what God told you to do. I was like, I was like, okay, that's a bit humbling. And so, and the guy wasn't perfect. He also talked about his imperfections, his flaws, the things he struggled with. And I thought, how many of us are like, we go through something horrible and you sit down, you know, I valued some of the times that Jerry and I've had to go out and do stuff together in the woods or our, you know, blessed car ride that we probably never would have had we not lost a brother Joel, or times that Pete, you and I've hung out because of things that probably had they not happened, we wouldn't have hung out that time period, or Cheryl going to rescue a bunch of stupid scouts somewhere that in the middle of the week. All those moments were created by not necessarily great moments, but had they not happened, relationships would not have built, growth would not have happened, and our close-knit community wouldn't have came together. Because had somebody asked Cheryl or I, and I'll just pick on the two of us, during a summer where our lives at home were a hot mess and we were trying to get things done, had somebody said, hey, Rick, Cheryl, why don't you guys get together and go drive out in the boondocks 3 hours one way, 3 hours back, and try to help some kids and some adult leaders that screwed up get their heads put on straight so this thing doesn't fall miserably apart? Nope, don't have time for that. But because we were connected to something, we were like, okay. And we went out, and it was those conversations that built a relationship between Cheryl and I that have stood for 25 years and has had a great impact when we look back on a lot of lives that would have never happened. Did I have time for it? No, I did not. Did I want to do it? No, I did not. Did was I thinking, yay? No, or Jerry and I had an adversarial relationship at that time. It wasn't until after Cheryl's and my rides to the rescue, as I like to refer to them historically, that Jerry and I ended up butting heads, and he accepted Christ, and we become brothers, And had I not had COVID, would I be sitting here with you and Pete? Sometimes when the devil tries to take us out is when growth happens. And that's where I want to encourage everybody. Look for the growth opportunities. Look for the holes in the battle line. Because obviously, Satan's not good at this, guys. He's been losing for 2,000 plus years. And we all know he's going to lose. This is like the best game ever to be in. We know the outcome. And it's not the Titanic where the ship sinks, it's where we win. So, like, we should look at these opportunities as a place for growth and a place to move the cross of Christ forward. Pete, did you want to say something? Because you have that look on your face.
Well, first, she could have made room for him on that floating wood. She could have made room for him. She was really, kind of selfish. But that's my thoughts on the ending of Titanic. To your frog in a pot analogy, and everything that we've seen on social media, I don't necessarily agree that pointing these people out and them losing their jobs is wrong. These are the people that are teaching our children, and they're only teaching them one thing.
Mhm.
and they're teaching them Satan's message. And I think we as parents, whether we're parents of current school age children or previous school age children, have a responsibility that to ensure that Satan doesn't win in education. And I think that we have the responsibility to not give him that foothold and that captive audience to spread his word when the other side doesn't get to spread their word.
To your
To an
point,
extent,
I
and
don't.
and for everybody that's concerned about the people losing their jobs and them having constitutional rights, um, I will say that every single uh, public job has uh, uh, a clause in it uh, that says that you there's a good behavior clause, for lack of a better term. And these people are just ignoring it. And because the environment they're in, by and large, is so evil and tolerant of evil and encouraging of evil, that they feel free to spout that off. And I don't I don't think it's our responsibility to make sure that they have a pulpit and an audience. And
So
if we just point out that this person, a teacher of children, is taking these views, we're not terminating their employment. It's their employer who's reviewing their contracts and their employee manual behavior manuals and making the decision.
so I think there's a line. My personal belief is I agree with you to a point. I agree with you that I think definitely telling people in places of instruction and some of the places that the decorum, the behavior, the political slants are inappropriate and will not be tolerated. There is nothing wrong with that. And I think the pushback of the church waking up, which is part of why I was saying in this, is appropriate and long overdue. And to the point where I brought George Barna's book up, that was his comment, just mine to make sure the record was correct, was he was saying that the church itself would be like a frog in the kettle being boiled alive and not realize it. And my point was, if you look back at what's happened over the time since he read the book, there's a lot to suggest that he was right in that assessment. But to Jerry's comment, Pete, Jerry brought up a comment of you don't have to be killed to be a martyr. And one of the things that when I went into the military, I went in that time period that we had lost the hostage rescue. And so I was Mr. Volunteer for all sorts of stuff when I went in the early 80s because like I wanted to avenge America. I wanted to be the right hand of God. I was very much the son of thunder. I want to help us bring it back. I had a lot of that spit and vinegar in me. And I've shared with this group before when I got to have a very big piece of equipment that was very capable of handling a situation. And Joel, you and I talked about it when we were on the trip. When the officer looked at me and said, and you're going to be in charge in the group that's going to move this group of people back because we need them moved away from where the runway is going to be. There was nothing that other group of people could do to stop me. I could have laid it waste and probably gotten away with it. But he said, benevolence, just because you have the ability to wipe them off the earth doesn't give you the right to wipe them off the earth. And what I look at is don't create martyrs. Like telling somebody, hey, you're teaching this stuff that is completely wrong on multiple levels and no more, okay, that's fair. Like, you've crossed the line. Taking them out and tar and feathering them in the modern way on social media and making it so the person has no place, they can become a martyr for the devil to use and say, this is the love of Christians. This is the love of Christianity. Not only did they remove him from this position, but now they're browbeating, and that can gain people on the other side. I'm like, push enough where people know that this is wrong and they learn from it, but do it in a loving, kind way. And that's where I'm not always seeing it. Personally, I see a lot of angst, anger, and people giving into that to achieve a goal and then justifying that it got achieved when it could be achieved just by applying pressure in the right way.
I tend to agree with you. I think there's an extreme that it's not healthy to go to. I've got an example, which is a social media post that was made yesterday. I actually reposted it with my comment, and I'm not going to name the person. I don't think that's appropriate, but let me read the post to you. Breaking. An online searchable database of nearly 40,000 or more leftists celebrating Charlie Cook's assassination will soon be available along with their employer. The storm has only begun. This is not an effort to address the education system or the things teachers are doing that they shouldn't be doing. This is not an effort to address people in the military who know that it's a violation of the UCMJ to do certain things. This is not an effort to address, some public servant who's obviously over the top in their expressions on social media. This is obviously an effort to search and destroy anyone with whom this individual disagrees, or anyone who has first of all, I think celebrating Charlie Kirk's death is despicable. That's not even a big enough word for it. But is it for me to search and destroy people's lives because they've done so? No, I don't see that as part of as a follower of Christ. I don't see that as part of my mission. I think, all the things you talked about and all the things we've talked about on this, on this call fall into those things, but this doesn't. And so I think there's a point at which there's an extreme that's being taken right now, an extreme that goes well beyond what is, for lack of a better word, righteous. And that's what I'm calling out. It's not so much, pointing out the high school teacher, the grade school teacher, or the college professor who's whacked as whacked could be, and fomenting violence. But it's this kind of stuff.
It's like I work in a very kind of difficult area because I work with a lot of vulnerable people. I work in an area that prizes, and this is a good thing, impartiality. We treat everyone with respect. No one gets treated any differently than anyone else. And despite whatever our personal things are going on, our personal beliefs, we treat everyone the same way, no matter what. And it can be difficult when I'm working with people who have certain ideas, certain beliefs, and hold, I look for ways to put my 2 cents in where it's appropriate, where I can, that doesn't pass that barrier of treating all people with respect. So if there's some patient that kind of brings up something, I will absolutely chime in with them. But I have to be an example of Jesus. I have to be that's my best way to fight what goes on daily with people that think differently than me. And it's very difficult. But that's what I feel like I'm called to be in. position.
Let us not forget that it's not always just our words, it's our deeds, and them knowing that we're a believer and then watching how we conduct ourselves.
Yeah.
That can make the biggest difference at times.
Yeah.
I think, many of us are in positions like that, Mary Beth. I certainly am. I mean, when I have people coming in because they're getting a concealed carry permit, for example, or they're doing something that they're taking a vocational class. One of my class rules is leave your politics at the door, because it doesn't matter to me from the standpoint this class is about, for example, concealed carry. It's a class for you to obtain a concealed carry permit. Your life is valuable. It doesn't matter to me which president you voted for, or what your belief structure is, or what you identify as, or any of those things. Your life is still valuable, and you have a right to defend it. And so we take it from that perspective. It's not unusual for me in the middle of class when I'm trying to get people to pay attention to the safety rules, for example, some firearm safety rules. I always let them know, look, one of the things I'd like you to do is leave your ego at the door. You may have been shooting since you were a child. You may have been shooting forever, but you can learn something from every class you ever attend. If you get prideful and you think you can't learn anything, then you probably won't. At which point I will tell them, there are many, I'm a Christian, there are many scriptures in the Bible about pride, but one notable one is pride comes before a fall. So, let's not have a fall. Let's make sure that we're paying attention to the rules. So I think there's a way to squeak God's word in there. Does that make sense? But do so. I've had I had a transgender student who came in and thanked me for allowing that in the class. And I said, he said, well, I prefer to be called. And I said, that's fine. I mean, whatever you tell me to call you, that's what I'm going to call you. I mean, it's because it's not for me to, in an environment like that, it's not for me to say, well, you have a belief I don't support. I don't support the transgender thing. Personally, I find it, I have my opinion about that, but that's not a place for that. But at the same time, he thought it was cool that I shared a scripture in the class, or two or three. So I think there's a way to do it, but to your point, Rick, I think there's a way to do it in a loving and respectful way. It does not require, hate and blood and villainy. That's the other side doing that stuff, and that does not accurately represent Christ. When I look at Jesus, he did not visit hate and blood and villainy upon people. It was visited upon him. So now, that said, when I leave here, I'm going to go to church with my kids, and I will be carrying. Okay. and half the other people in the church are too.
Being prepared.
So, right. That's being prepared, but that's different.
I think one of the things to keep in mind after this week was how impressive it was that no one on this planet that knew who he was did not know that he was a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at like John 13:15 and Matthew 5:16 and all of the scriptures that talk about being an example and letting your light shine and that is, I think he was the perfect example of that, in that nobody questioned what his beliefs were. Nobody questioned who he served. Nobody ever had to question that, because it was obvious in the way he lived and the way he spoke. And I think that's something that I know I could do a better job of.
Mm-hmm.
Me too. Thank you very much, Rick, for a great lesson. Round of applause.
It's God, not me.
Thank you. Yes, but he used you very, very well today. And thank you for joining us for this is our Bible group, and we do this every week. Rick wanted us to post this for you, so we've done it. Thank you very much for joining us for this. It's really good to have you along. We'll post another one soon. Have a great week.